Sunlight streamed through the glass dome of the Crawford estate, illuminating a sea of white roses that lined the marble aisles. Reporters clustered outside the mansion gates, their cameras flashing as they called it the wedding of the year. The air was rich with perfume, champagne, and the hum of gossip. Inside, Lena Hayes stood before a mirror, her ivory gown hugging her growing belly. The soft shimmer of silk reflected the glow of a woman in love, and the innocence of one who still believed in happily ever after. Her groom, Ethan Crawford, billionaire tech genius and media darling, had promised her a forever filled with safety and love. But beneath the glittering chandeliers, whispers stirred. Her bridesmaid, Maya, entered quietly, eyes uneasy. "Lena," she murmured. "I heard Ethan on the phone. Something didn't sound right." Lena laughed softly, brushing it off. "Nerves, maybe. It's just the wedding chaos." Yet, as the orchestra began the opening notes of the wedding march, a chill ran down her spine. The laughter, the applause, the perfect dream, it all felt like a performance. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't the fairy tale you think it is." It began 2 years earlier, in a ballroom draped in silver and glass. Lena Hayes, a small-town interior designer, had been hired to style one of Crawford Tech's elite product launches. She worked quietly behind the scenes, arranging orchids and candles, unaware that her life was about to collide with a billionaire's gaze. Ethan Crawford noticed her immediately. Her simplicity in a room full of glitter. He approached her during a break, offering a drink and a disarming smile. "You have an eye for perfection," he said, his tone smooth, practiced. Lena blushed, mistaking his charm for sincerity. Their connection was electric. Within weeks, Ethan had swept her into his glittering world. Private jets, rooftop dinners, and promises whispered under city lights. "You belong beside me," he'd say, fingers tracing her hand like a vow. Lena believed him. But perfection has shadows. He'd vanish on mysterious business trips, his phone locked with codes she never dared to ask about. Whenever she mentioned meeting his family, his expression cooled. "They're complicated," he'd mutter, changing the subject. When she discovered she was pregnant, fear and joy collided. Ethan reacted with dazzling enthusiasm, a proposal under 1,000 fairy lights, a diamond the size of her heartbeat. "You'll never have to worry again," he assured her. Lena mistook that confidence for love. She couldn't know that behind his tender smile, her unborn child wasn't a blessing to him, only leverage in a corporate war she hadn't even seen coming. The grand clock in the Crawford mansion struck noon, echoing through the corridors like a countdown to destiny. In her dressing room, Lena adjusted her lace veil, her reflection shimmering with nervous joy. The laughter of guests and the faint melody of violins floated from outside. Everything looked perfect. Then the door burst open. Maya, her best friend, stumbled in, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. "Lena, you need to hear this," she said, her voice breaking. Confused, Lena took the phone. A recording played. Ethan's unmistakable voice, cool and detached. "After the wedding, I'll transfer the company shares. Once she signs the prenup, she's done. I only need the child to secure the board's vote." The room seemed to tilt. The edges of her vision blurred as her heart slammed against her ribs. Her baby. Her marriage. Her entire life. Just a transaction. Tears streaked her carefully applied makeup, dripping onto the silk of her gown. "No," she whispered, choking on disbelief. Maya grasped her hand. "Lena, you can't go through with this. Call it off." But something shifted inside Lena, something fierce, cold and sharp. Her trembling stopped. Her eyes, once filled with innocence, hardened into steel. "No," she said quietly, setting the phone aside. "He wanted a show. Then I'll give him one he'll never forget." As the wedding bells began to ring, her heartbreak transformed into strategy. Revenge had just been born. Lena walked down the marble aisle with a smile like polished porcelain. White roses framed her path and cameras captured each measured step, but inside her chest a storm churned. Every footfall felt like a verdict, every breath a broken promise. Around her, guests rose and applauded, faces softened by chandelier light, but none noticed the calculation behind her calm. Ethan waited at the altar with the practiced poise of a man who believed he controlled destiny. He took her hand with a confident squeeze, unaware that the soft pressure answered a clenched fist of resolve. The organ swelled, and Lena felt the world tilt between memory and intent. When the officiant guided them through vows, Lena's voice trembled once, a quiver the cameras would call emotion. She held his gaze and whispered a line he couldn't place. "Till betrayal do us part." He laughed, misreading it for nerves, and mouthed the words for the cameras. Silence fell when the priest asked if anyone objected. Lena's throat tightened, but she stayed mute. Her revenge did not live in a halted ceremony. It lived in the quiet promise she would keep after the ring slid onto her finger. He would never suspect her. The ballroom shimmered with gold and champagne. Crystal chandeliers cast light over a crowd of politicians, investors, and socialites who raised their glasses to celebrate the perfect couple. Lena moved gracefully through it all, smiling, nodding, laughing softly beside the man who thought he'd won. Ethan, flushed with pride, tapped his glass and addressed the room. "Today marks not just our marriage," he declared, "but a partnership that will strengthen Crawford Tech's future." Applause roared as he slipped his arm around her waist. "To my brilliant wife, my muse, my greatest investment." The words made Lena's stomach twist, but she smiled sweetly. "Investment," she repeated in her mind, "how fitting." He had no idea that the documents he'd so eagerly signed before the ceremony, the ones he believed were routine prenup addendums, were anything but ordinary. Weeks earlier, with Maya's help and guidance from a discreet lawyer friend, Lena had replaced several legal clauses. Hidden among vows of love and partnership was a single, devastating condition. Upon legal union, half of Ethan's controlling shares would automatically transfer to her name. Now, as the orchestra swelled and guests toasted, Lena leaned in close. Ethan kissed her hand, triumphant. "For richer or poorer, right?" she whispered. He laughed, charmed by what he thought was affection. But Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes. Somewhere deep inside she knew, the empire he built on deceit was already hers. Morning light filtered through silk curtains, painting soft gold across the master suite. Ethan stretched lazily, reaching for the spot beside him, empty. The satin sheets were cold. Confusion flickered, then unease. He glanced toward the bedside table, where a diamond ring glinted atop a folded note. His breath caught as he unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, calm, final. "You married me for power. I married you for truth. Guess who got what they wanted?" A surge of panic ripped through him. He grabbed his phone, barking orders to cancel her credit cards, only to hear from his assistant that his accounts were frozen. Moments later, his lawyer's voice confirmed the impossible. Every legal document he'd signed for the wedding had transferred controlling shares, intellectual property, and even the upcoming media rights for Crawford Tech's next product to Lena Crawford. His empire, his identity, belonged to her. He tore through the room, shouting, calling her name, but Lena was already gone. Cameras never caught her leaving the estate. No jet, no trace. Only silence. Down the coast highway, Lena's car sped toward freedom. Her hand rested protectively on her growing belly. For the first time in months she felt peace. The billionaire had finally lost everything, to the woman he thought he owned. By afternoon the world was on fire. Headlines blazed across every screen. Lena Crawford takes over tech empire after sudden split. Reporters flooded the gates of the Crawford estate, shouting questions Ethan refused to answer. His phone buzzed non-stop. Investors withdrawing, partners demanding explanations, and his board threatening an emergency meeting. The media dug deeper, uncovering a decade of buried scandals. Tax evasion, bribed officials, and forged acquisitions. Every detail came from an anonymous whistleblower, Maya, guided by Lena's quiet approval. Within 24 hours, Ethan's reputation lay in ruins. His charm no longer disarmed. His name no longer commanded awe. While he barricaded himself behind legal teams, the woman he betrayed stepped into the light. Lena appeared at a press conference wearing a modest white dress that hugged her pregnancy softly. Cameras flashed, but she didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, strong. "I was never after wealth," she said. "I only wanted respect. And truth." There was no malice in her tone, only grace, and that made her victory even sharper. Clips of her statement went viral within hours. The betrayed bride became a symbol of strength, her calm composure slicing through the billionaire's arrogance. The man who once controlled everything was now powerless, watching from the shadows as the woman he underestimated rewrote his empire and his legacy with a single act of truth. Months drifted by, and the chaos of headlines faded into memory. Along a quiet stretch of coastline, Lena built a new rhythm of life, one filled with ocean air, laughter, and quiet purpose. She rented a small white cottage overlooking the sea and founded the Haven Foundation, a support network for single mothers who had faced abandonment and deceit. Each morning she painted the nursery, sunlight spilling across the soft blue walls. Her baby boy kicked gently, reminding her that love, real love, still existed in small, pure forms. Letters from Ethan arrived every few weeks, thick envelopes filled with remorse. Some included expensive gifts, others trembling apologies. Lena never opened them. She placed each one in a box labeled "The Past." Her revenge had never been about greed or humiliation. It was about reflection. She wanted Ethan to confront the hollowness beneath his empire, to see the wreckage his ambition caused. One evening she stood by the window, hands on her belly, whispering to her unborn son, "You were my reason to survive, not his tool to control." Outside, waves crashed gently against the shore. Lena smiled faintly, her heart no longer broken, only stronger, wiser, and beautifully free. A full year passed before another envelope appeared at Lena's door. Plain, unmarked, but instantly recognizable. The handwriting stopped her breath for a moment. Ethan Crawford. She hesitated, then opened it slowly. The letter was written on plain paper, the words careful, almost broken. "You taught me the cost of lies. I lost everything, but maybe I needed to. I spent months searching for what I thought I'd lost. Money, power, reputation. But the truth is, I lost you long before that. Congratulations on your son. I hope he never grows up to be me." Lena read it twice, her eyes calm. No anger, no tears, just understanding. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the box labeled "Past," where every remnant of her old life rested. Then she stepped out onto the balcony. The ocean glittered beneath the morning sun. Her son, now toddling across the terrace, laughed as the breeze lifted his curls. Lena smiled, not with triumph but with peace. The world had once named her the betrayed bride, a symbol of heartbreak and scandal. Now she was simply Lena Hayes, the woman who rose from ruin and taught the world that silence could be the loudest kind of victory. Rain slashed against the towering windows of the Monroe estate, lightning flickering across the marble floors like fractured glass. The air was thick, heavy with silence and unspoken truths. Evelyn Carter stood alone in the study, her trembling hand clutching a single letter, the ink smudged where her tears had fallen. 8 months pregnant, she could feel her baby's faint kicks against her ribs, a reminder of life, even as everything around her felt dead. Her husband, Adrian Monroe, had once promised her forever. Now, forever meant loneliness, humiliation, and whispered scandals splashed across society pages. She had seen the messages. The woman in Paris. The hotel receipts. The lies delivered with a practiced smile. Evelyn had kept quiet long enough. Her reflection in the window stared back, pale, hollow, but burning with resolve. "You'll never see me fall," she whispered to the storm outside. When dawn broke, the mansion buzzed with confusion. The maids knocked, the butler searched, and Adrian returned home to find only emptiness. Her clothes gone, her perfume faded from the air. On his desk sat a single envelope, elegant and cold. He tore it open, his hands shaking. Inside, her words cut sharper than any blade. "Don't look for me. What you built on my pain will soon crumble." And with that, Evelyn Monroe, the woman he thought he owned, vanished into the storm. 2 years earlier, the world saw perfection. Adrian and Evelyn Monroe were the faces of success, a couple that every magazine envied and every investor admired. Together, they stood at the helm of Monroe Global, an empire that spanned real estate, fashion, and technology. Adrian, the charming visionary, dazzled the media with his charisma and speeches about innovation. Evelyn, the quiet strategist, stayed behind the scenes, drafting proposals, designing campaigns, and crafting the very blueprints that made the empire thrive. Together, they looked unstoppable, the perfect union of brilliance and beauty. But behind the glittering facade, their marriage was a cage lined with gold. Adrian's need for control deepened with every success. His compliments turned into commands. His affection became performance. Whenever Evelyn challenged him, he would smile coldly and say, "You'd be nothing without me." He started erasing her credit, removing her name from projects, taking her ideas and presenting them as his own. Board members praised his genius, never realizing it was hers. When Evelyn became pregnant, she hoped it would heal them. Instead, it revealed who he truly was. Adrian began staying out late, brushing off her concerns with, "You're too emotional." Then came the affair, not whispered gossip, but a deliberate humiliation. His assistant always nearby, always smirking. But what Adrian didn't know was that Evelyn wasn't just enduring, she was preparing. She began collecting files, screenshots, voice recordings, everything. Every cruel word, every forged contract, every fraudulent deal. And while he was busy building his empire, Evelyn was building something stronger, a plan to take it all apart, one signature at a time. The ballroom glittered with diamonds, champagne, and deceit. Evelyn stood beside Adrian, her hand resting on his arm as photographers captured their smiles. To the world, they were perfection, the Monroes, the couple who defined luxury and love. But beneath the shimmer, Evelyn's heart was turning to ice. Across the hall, she saw her husband's assistant, the woman she had once trusted, flaunting a bracelet identical to the one Adrian had given her for their anniversary. The realization was a knife to the heart. Adrian leaned down and whispered through a rehearsed smile, "Keep smiling, Evelyn. The cameras love us." Later that night, behind closed doors, she confronted him. Her voice trembled, not from fear but fury. "You gave her my bracelet." Adrian laughed, that cruel hollow sound she knew too well. "You're overreacting. You're lucky I still bring you to these events. You're nothing without me, just the wife. A decoration." Something inside her shattered, not from pain but awakening. She saw him clearly for the first time. The arrogance, the cruelty, the emptiness. As Adrian poured another drink and boasted about his next deal, Evelyn silently walked to the window. The city lights flickered below like sparks waiting to burn. That night she didn't cry. She planned. And when dawn came, Evelyn Monroe had already made her decision. She wouldn't just leave him. She would erase the man who built his empire on her silence. The morning after Evelyn's disappearance, the world woke up to chaos. News anchors shouted headlines across every screen. "Billionaire's pregnant wife missing." Reporters swarmed the Monroe estate, drones circling overhead like vultures. Adrian Monroe stepped before the cameras, his expression perfectly rehearsed. "My wife, Evelyn, is the light of my life," he said, voice cracking just enough to sound human. "Please, if anyone knows anything, come forward. I just want her home." The world saw a desperate husband. But inside, Adrian was unraveling. Every night, he replayed her last words. "What you built on my pain will crumble." He couldn't shake them. Days turned into weeks, and whispers began to spread. Anonymous tips flooded the police hotline. Evelyn's old colleagues mentioned encrypted files she'd been collecting before she vanished. Suddenly, key investors began to pull out of Monroe Global without explanation. Then came the shock. An envelope delivered directly to the company's boardroom, stamped with Evelyn's signature seal. Inside, a single sentence in her elegant handwriting read, "Truth doesn't vanish, it surfaces." Attached was a flash drive. When the directors opened it, confidential documents filled the screen, proof of financial fraud, offshore accounts, and corruption at the highest level. Evelyn hadn't just disappeared. She had detonated the first charge in the destruction of Adrian's empire. Adrian had always believed he was untouchable, too powerful, too connected, too rich to fall. But Evelyn knew his arrogance better than anyone. And that's exactly what she counted on. Before she vanished, she left behind a weapon disguised as evidence, a series of encrypted files hidden deep within Monroe Global's private servers. She'd worked quietly for months, using her position as his strategic advisor to gain access to everything. Private accounts, recorded calls, and boardroom conversations that were never meant to see daylight. Inside those files were damning truths. Offshore accounts, illegal mergers, falsified reports, and hush money transfers to silence ex-employees. There were even audio clips of Adrian bragging to his mistress. "She's just a pawn." The pregnant wife makes the perfect image for investors. When the files surfaced online, they spread like wildfire. Major news networks broadcasted every word. Screens across the world lit up with headlines. Monroe Global under investigation for fraud. CEO accused of exploiting pregnant wife in corporate cover-up. The market responded in hours. Monroe Global's stock crashed 60% overnight. Government officials announced formal investigations. Loyal partners distanced themselves instantly. Adrian's carefully curated empire, the billion-dollar illusion he built on deception and manipulation, began to crumble like wet paper. As reporters surrounded his mansion, screaming questions and flashing cameras, Adrian locked himself in his study, hands trembling as he stared at the TV. On the screen was Evelyn's photo, smiling softly, hand on her pregnant belly. And beneath it, the headline read, "She warned him, what he built on her pain has fallen." As the investigation deepened, Adrian's perfect world collapsed into chaos. Board members resigned, investors fled, and the media tore apart every piece of his past. But the final blow came from the one person he thought would never betray him. His mistress, Chloe Hart. Cornered by federal investigators and terrified of prison, Chloe turned witness. Her statement confirmed every one of Evelyn's claims: the forged documents, the hidden funds, the lies spun to protect Adrian's image. She handed over text messages, recorded phone calls, and even surveillance footage from Adrian's private office. But one part of her testimony stunned the world. Weeks before her disappearance, Evelyn had shown up at Chloe's apartment. There was no anger, no threats, only calm. "She didn't yell," Chloe told the authorities, trembling. "She just looked at me and said, 'I hope you find peace before he ruins you too.' Then she left." That single line echoed through courtrooms, newsrooms, and the public's mind. Evelyn hadn't vanished for vengeance. She had vanished for freedom. She wasn't running from Adrian anymore. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, freeing not just herself but everyone who had ever been trapped in his shadow. The fall of Adrian Monroe became the biggest corporate collapse of the decade. Each morning brought new headlines. Monroe Global under federal investigation, CEO accused of fraud and abuse, the billionaire wife who outsmarted him. His world, once built on power and arrogance, began to cave in faster than he could react. His accounts were frozen, luxury cars repossessed, and private jets grounded. Board members fled like rats from a sinking ship, denying any connection to him. Investors demanded answers he could no longer give. From the windows of his once mighty skyscraper, Adrian watched protesters outside holding signs that read, "Justice for Evelyn." The press hounded him at every turn. His reputation shredded beyond repair. He spent his nights alone in the mansion, now eerily silent, surrounded by the ghosts of his success. In a drunken haze, he smashed his awards, tore his suits, and replayed old home videos. Evelyn laughing, painting, her soft voice saying, We built this together. Tears streaked his face as the realization hit. He hadn't just lost her. He'd destroyed everything she helped him build. Then came the cruelest irony, the revelation of the Hope Rising Foundation. Evelyn had created it in secret years earlier, using his name and funds. Its mission, to protect women from men like him. The foundation flourished as his empire died. Evelyn had used his wealth to write her freedom, and his downfall, with the same signature he once used to own her. Months had turned into an endless blur of silence. The mansion that once echoed with laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered deals was now a tomb of regret. Adrian Monroe lived among its ruins, a ghost haunting his own life. Every night, he sat at his desk beneath the dim glow of a single lamp, writing letters he would never send. Letters to Evelyn. "You won," he had written once. "You destroyed me. But I still see you in every sunrise, every quiet room. I don't hate you, I hate the man I became." Stacks of unsent letters filled his drawer. Apologies too late to matter, memories he couldn't bury. The fortune meant nothing now. What he missed was the woman who once stood beside him, the one who had believed in him before greed and arrogance turned his love to poison. Then one morning, a courier arrived at his gate with a small, neatly wrapped package. His heart froze when he saw the handwriting on the label, Evelyn's. Inside was a single photograph. A baby girl, no more than a few months old, smiling with eyes that looked painfully familiar. Tucked behind it was a note written in Evelyn's graceful script. "She'll grow up knowing strength, not fear. Thank you for teaching me what love should never be." Adrian stared at the photo for hours, and for the first time in his life, he wept without pride. Far from the noise of headlines and scandals, Evelyn Carter, now living under a quiet new name, had found something she never thought possible: peace. In a small coastal town, where the scent of salt filled the air and waves sang against the shore, she built a new life from the pieces of her old one. Her daughter, little Emma, had just turned 1. Every giggle, every tiny step, reminded Evelyn that survival could bloom into joy. Days began with sunlight streaming through open windows and ended with paint-stained fingers and sea breeze in her hair. She sold her art in local galleries, her paintings filled with color and resilience, each brushstroke a fragment of her healing. Through the Hope Rising Foundation, she quietly funded shelters for women escaping abuse. She never attached her name, never sought recognition. Her fulfillment came from seeing others rise from the same darkness she once endured. Sometimes an old headline would drift across her phone: Adrian Monroe's final appeal denied. She would pause, not with bitterness but with acceptance. His story had ended where hers had begun. One evening, holding Emma close as the sunset painted the sea gold, Evelyn whispered, "We didn't escape the storm, sweetheart. We learned how to dance in it." And for the first time she truly believed it. Years later, Evelyn Carter, now the founder and visionary behind Hope Rising Global, stood beneath the bright lights of a grand conference hall. The world watched as she unveiled a groundbreaking tech initiative designed to empower women entrepreneurs worldwide. The banners behind her carried her name, Evelyn Carter Monroe, not as a shadow of her past, but as a symbol of transformation. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, and the crowd rose in applause. Her voice was calm, clear, and powerful. "Every empire built on lies eventually collapses," she said. "But the one built on truth, it never falls." As the applause thundered, Evelyn smiled faintly. Adrian's words once echoed in her mind: "You'll never survive without me." Now, standing on her own stage, she realized she wasn't just surviving. She was leading a movement that would outlive them both. When she stepped outside, a soft wind swept across her face, the same kind that had once carried her away on the night she vanished. Sometimes, disappearing isn't escape. It's rebirth. The moment a woman stops running from her past and begins walking toward her destiny. Sunrise. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within Elena Rivera's heart. Thunder cracked over the sprawling Cole mansion, lightning illuminating the marble floors and gold-framed portraits that once symbolized her dream life. Now they only mocked her. At 27, with a swelling belly and trembling hands, she waited in the grand hallway for her husband, Damien Cole, the tech billionaire whose name commanded rooms, whose love once commanded her world. The clock struck midnight when the sound of tires splashing on wet pavement reached her ears. Relief flickered, until the car door opened and she saw her, Sienna, a tall, smirking woman stepping out beside Damien. Elena's voice cracked. "Damien, who is she?" He didn't answer. Instead, in front of the stunned staff, he said coldly, "Pack your things, Elena. You don't live here anymore." The words hit harder than the thunder outside. "You can't mean that. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." Damien's eyes narrowed, filled with arrogance and disgust. "That baby isn't mine." The guards hesitated, but one gesture from him was enough. Rough hands seized her arms, dragging her toward the open door. Rain soaked through her thin nightgown as she stumbled onto the driveway. Barefoot, humiliated. She fell to her knees, clutching her belly, sobbing. "You'll regret this," she whispered through tears. Damien turned away, shielding Sienna with his umbrella as if Elena was a stranger. Lightning flared, casting his face in a cruel glow. From the ground, her voice broke through the storm, soft but deadly certain. "I swear the next time you see me, Damien Cole, you'll wish you never threw me away." The mansion doors slammed shut, leaving her alone, broken, drenched, and burning with a vow that would one day make headlines. Days blurred into nights as Elena wandered the streets, her body weak, her spirit shattered. The cold seeped into her bones, and hunger clawed at her insides. When she finally collapsed near a bus stop, a passerby called for help, and that's how she ended up in a small, run-down women's shelter on the edge of the city. The room smelled of damp wood and medicine. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed hollow cheeks and dark circles beneath once bright eyes. She was barely recognizable, a ghost of the woman who once hosted charity galas in diamond gowns. As her pregnancy advanced, her health worsened. Some nights she clutched her belly, praying her baby would survive even if she didn't. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the ache of betrayal echoing through every heartbeat. One morning, the television in the shelter's common room blared with breaking news. Billionaire Damien Cole announces engagement to socialite Sienna Ray. The world celebrated their love story. Elena felt her chest tighten, tears sliding silently down her face. That's when Maya, a gentle nurse volunteering at the shelter, found her. She brought her soup, warmth, and something rarer, kindness. "You're not broken," Maya told her softly, holding her trembling hand. "You're just being rewritten." Those words lingered like a spark. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found an old notebook. Her hands shook as she began to sketch. Dresses, fabrics, ideas she once buried. Her forgotten passion for design flickered back to life. Faint but unstoppable. Months later, Elena gave birth to a baby boy. Leo, her reason to keep breathing when everything else felt impossible. The nights were long, filled with his soft cries and her silent tears, but for the first time she wasn't crying from pain, she was crying from purpose. In the dim shelter room, while Leo slept beside her in a borrowed crib, Elena opened a donated laptop. She began turning her sketches into digital art, elegant dress concepts, minimalist designs inspired by survival and strength. She signed them with an alias, ER Studios, her initials, but no one would ever know. At first, she sold her work for almost nothing, just enough to afford baby formula and fabric scraps. But one morning, a small influencer on Instagram posted a photo wearing one of Elena's handmade pieces, a soft silk wrap with a caption, "Made by a mysterious artist, ER Studios, empowering and breathtaking." Within hours, her follower count doubled. Orders began flooding in, too many for her small corner of the shelter. She worked tirelessly between feedings, sketching through exhaustion, every stitch a silent declaration that she was rebuilding her life. Then, one viral post changed everything. A fashion blogger with millions of followers wore an ER Studios dress to a red carpet event, calling it the future of sustainable couture. The internet erupted in praise, and still, no one knew the truth. The world had fallen in love with Elena Rivera's art, not realizing it was born from heartbreak. As Studios grew beyond her tiny shelter room, Elena began to attract attention from unexpected places. One day, she received an email that would change everything, an invitation to a local Women in Innovation forum. Nervous but curious, she attended, wearing one of her own handmade dresses, the seams imperfect but full of heart. There she met Dr. Priya Singh, a poised and visionary venture capitalist known for supporting women-led startups. Priya noticed Elena's quiet presence and complimented her dress. When Elena shyly admitted it was her own design, Priya's eyes lit up. Over coffee, Elena shared her story, not of betrayal but of rebirth. Priya listened intently, then said, "You don't need pity, Elena. You need a platform. Let me help you build one." A week later, Priya offered her a seed investment to formalize her growing brand. Together they founded Aurora Atelier, an eco-conscious fashion line inspired by themes of resilience, sustainability, and renewal. The name Aurora symbolized the dawn after the darkest night, a reflection of Elena's own journey. With Priya's business expertise and Elena's artistic vision, Aurora Atelier became more than fashion. It became a statement. Women who wore it felt empowered, not just beautiful. Within months, major magazines featured their work, calling it the movement redefining women's strength. Elena, once voiceless and broken, now spoke at conferences, her confidence blooming. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building an empire out of the ashes of her past. While Elena's world was being rebuilt from love and perseverance, Damien Cole's was collapsing under the weight of greed and deceit. Cole Dynamics, once the crown jewel of the tech industry, was now the subject of federal investigations. Whispers of insider trading, data leaks, and fraudulent partnerships spread like wildfire through the financial world. The man who once stood untouchable on magazine covers now faced lawsuits, frozen accounts, and vanishing investors. Even his board members turned on him, eager to escape the sinking ship he'd built with arrogance. Home, things were no better. Sienna, his new wife, had grown tired of his temper and his dwindling fortune. In secret, she began leaking confidential data to competitors, demanding ownership shares in exchange for silence. Damien's rage was volcanic, but powerless. The empire he'd traded his soul for was crumbling in front of him. One morning, while reading a business column, he came across a headline that twisted the knife deeper. Aurora Atelier, the brand empowering broken women to rise. The name lingered in his mind, but it was the logo that froze him. A delicate, swirling pattern, a phoenix rising from fire, drawn in the same elegant strokes he had once seen Elena sketch at their kitchen table years ago. For the first time in years, Damien felt something he didn't recognize anymore. Fear. He whispered her name under his breath. Elena. The past he buried was rising, and this time it had claws. The ballroom shimmered with golden light and the hum of anticipation. It was the Global Women in Business Summit, where the world's most influential female entrepreneurs gathered. Among them, Elena Rivera, founder of Aurora Atelier, sat poised in the front row. Her sleek gown, one of her own creations, flowed like liquid silver, symbolizing grace reborn from pain. When the host announced the nominees for Startup of the Year, the audience cheered. Then came the words that froze the room. Aurora Atelier, founded by Elena Rivera, formerly known as Studios. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The mysterious designer was her. The same woman who vanished from the public eye years ago. Cameras turned, flashes bursting like fireworks as Elena rose and made her way to the stage. Across town, Damien Cole sat in his dim office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and unpaid invoices. The TV on his desk played the live stream. When Elena appeared on screen, radiant and unbroken, he went pale. The woman he'd thrown away was now being celebrated by the very world he once dominated. At the podium, Elena smiled softly. "When they threw me out, I thought my story was over," she said, her voice steady and warm. But sometimes being thrown out is how you learn to fly. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. Cameras captured every second. The tears, the triumph, the rebirth. That night the world finally knew her name, and so did he. Months after her unforgettable speech, success seemed to follow Elena wherever she went. But it wasn't luck. It was the fire she had built from every broken piece of her past. When Forbes magazine reached out for an exclusive feature, Elena thought it was a joke at first. But the editor's words were genuine. The world needs to know your story, not just your brand. The headline read, "From Abandoned to Billionaire. The Woman Who Redefined Survival." The photoshoot took place inside Aurora Atelier's flagship studio. Walls lined with soft pastels, sketches, and the gentle hum of creativity. Elena stood in a custom gown of white silk and gold embroidery, holding baby Leo on her hip. Around her were models wearing her designs, the living embodiment of rebirth. When the issue hit stands, her face graced the cover, not as a victim but as a visionary. Her serene, confident smile told the world, she made it. Within hours, social media exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Elena Rivera Rise and hashtag Aurora Power trended worldwide. Women from every corner of the globe shared her story, calling her a symbol of hope and resilience. Investors flooded in, eager to join her movement. Aurora Atelier's valuation soared past $800 million, turning Elena Rivera into one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the industry. But for her it wasn't about money, it was about meaning. The same world that once watched her fall was now celebrating her rise. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers and soft violin music. The event, Aurora Foundation's charity gala for single mothers, was Elena's proudest creation, a night dedicated to giving hope to women once silenced by pain. Reporters, philanthropists, and celebrities filled the hall, celebrating her journey. But among the applause and laughter, a figure lingered near the entrance. Damian Cole. His once polished suit hung loose on his frail frame, eyes hollow with defeat. Bankruptcy, scandal, and betrayal had stripped him of everything. His company, his fortune, and even Sienna, who had fled overseas with what little he had left. When their eyes met, time seemed to stop. The room fell silent as Damian stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Elena, I was wrong. I was lost. Please, give me a second chance. I've changed." Elena regarded him quietly, her poise unshaken. The crowd watched, cameras flashing in stunned anticipation. She took a single step closer, her gaze firm but calm. "You left me to die," she said softly, every word cutting through the air. "But I lived. And that's my revenge." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Damian's face crumbled. Elena turned gracefully, walking away toward the stage, her gown trailing like a banner of triumph. The cameras caught every second, the fallen man and the woman reborn. As she disappeared into the light, Damian stood motionless, realizing too late that the woman he had discarded had become everything he had once dreamed of being. What began as a personal journey of survival soon transformed into a movement that changed countless lives. Elena launched the Aurora Foundation, a global initiative providing financial grants, shelter, and training to single mothers and women escaping abusive relationships. She wanted no woman to ever feel the loneliness she once endured. The foundation's workshops buzzed with laughter and new beginnings, women learning sewing, design, and digital business skills. Many of them had stories like hers: abandonment, betrayal, despair. Now they stitched hope into every thread of fabric that bore the Aurora Atelier label. Elena personally hired hundreds of women who had lost everything, offering them not just jobs but dignity. Her brand became more than couture. It became freedom in fabric, every design carrying the quiet rebellion of women who refused to stay broken. Years passed, and her son Leo grew up surrounded by strength and compassion. He often watched from the sidelines as his mother spoke to crowds, her words echoing through the halls of conferences and schools. When asked what his mother did for a living, Leo always smiled and said proudly, "She makes women believe in themselves again." And that, more than fame, fortune, or revenge, became Elena's true legacy. A year later, the once grand Cole mansion stood silent, its gates rusted, windows shuttered, and gardens overtaken by weeds. What was once a symbol of arrogance and cruelty had become a hollow monument to regret. When the property went up for auction, there was only one anonymous bidder, Elena Rivera. On a soft spring morning, she arrived with Leo by her side. The doors creaked open, releasing the ghostly echoes of a past she no longer feared. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight as she walked across the marble floor, the same place where she had once begged for mercy and been thrown into the storm. She paused in the grand hall, holding her son's small hand. Her eyes glistened not with pain but serenity. "This isn't revenge," she whispered, her voice steady and full of grace. "This is peace." Weeks later, the mansion was transformed into Aurora headquarters, a place of innovation and empowerment. On one wall of her new office hung a framed Forbes cover, her radiant smile immortalized beside the headline, "From Abandoned to Billionaire." That evening, Elena stood before a gathering of women at her foundation's annual event. Her tone was warm, her presence luminous. "They thought breaking us would end us," she said, her gaze sweeping across faces filled with hope. "But every time a woman rises after betrayal, the world changes." Applause thundered through the hall as lights dimmed around her, leaving only her glowing silhouette. The camera panned in, capturing her serene smile before fading to black. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like stars as violins played softly in the background. Every corner of the grand ballroom radiated luxury: golden drapes, white roses, and the scent of champagne that mingled with laughter. Evelyn Hart, dressed in a shimmering silver gown, stood beside her husband, Daniel, the powerful and charming CEO of Hart Enterprises. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple, beauty and success personified. But beneath Evelyn's flawless smile hid trembling hands and a secret that could change everything. She gently rested her palm on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life within her. For months, triplets. A miracle she had prayed for. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart, a toast to your happiness," a guest declared. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. Yet Daniel's smile was practiced, hollow. His gaze slid past his wife to where Maya, his secretary and secret lover, stood in a crimson dress that left little to imagination. Their eyes met, and an unspoken spark passed between them. Evelyn's heart clenched. She knew that look. She used to be on the receiving end of it. Pain burned in her chest as she whispered to herself, "Don't let them see you break." The music swelled, laughter grew louder, but Evelyn felt the room closing in. Daniel leaned toward Maya under the guise of greeting a guest. And as midnight struck, the celebration that began in light ended in the quiet shadow of betrayal. The clinking of cutlery echoed softly in the vast, silent dining hall. The aroma of Evelyn's home-cooked meal, his favorite rosemary steak, hung in the air, untouched and growing cold. She had spent hours perfecting it, hoping tonight might bring back even a spark of what they once shared. The clock ticked past 8 before Daniel finally walked through the door. His tie loosened, his expression sharp with irritation rather than fatigue. Evelyn stood quickly, brushing invisible wrinkles from her dress. "Daniel, I made dinner. I thought we could eat together for once." He sighed, tossing his jacket onto a chair. "Not tonight, Evelyn. I've had a long day." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the small envelope on the table, the sonogram photo. "Please just look at this. We're having triplets." For a moment silence. Then a bitter laugh escaped him. "Triplets? You expect me to raise 3 kids when I can barely stand one conversation with you?" The words sliced through her. The photo slipped from her hand, the glass frame shattering against the marble floor. The sound echoed like a verdict. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed. "Meh." His face softened instantly, lips curving into a smile Evelyn hadn't seen in months. And in that fragile, heartbreaking instant, she understood. Daniel was already gone. Maya knew exactly how to play her role, soft-spoken and respectful when others were around, but venomous when no one was watching. At the office, she smiled politely whenever Evelyn visited, calling her Mrs. Hart with false sweetness. Yet the moment Evelyn turned her back, Maya would text Daniel pictures, silk sheets, red lipstick, and messages dripping with temptation. "Real love doesn't need vows," she'd write. "Just passion." Daniel, blind in infatuation and ego, devoured every word. Soon his business trips grew longer, his late nights at meetings more frequent. When he came home, his cologne smelled unfamiliar, darker, foreign, expensive. Evelyn tried to pretend she didn't notice, but every unanswered call, every cold glance, chipped away at the woman she once was. Her doctor's voice echoed sternly in her mind. "You need rest, Evelyn. Stress could harm all 3 babies." But rest never came. Not with Daniel's indifference looming over her. One evening, when she tried to reach him again, he snapped through the phone. "Don't guilt-trip me, Evelyn. You made your choices. Now let me live mine." The line went dead. Hours later, the maid found her collapsed on the living room floor, motionless. Blood stained the rug beneath her. Daniel's phone rang again and again, unanswered, as he sipped champagne beside Maya at a luxury beach resort. A sharp scent of antiseptic greeted Evelyn as her eyelids fluttered open. White walls, dim lights, and the steady beep of a monitor told her she was alive, but barely. Her body ached, every breath tight in her chest. When she tried to move, pain shot through her abdomen. Panic surged. "Babies." A nurse hurried over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're safe, Mrs. Hart. You lost a lot of blood, but we stabilized you. The babies are still holding on." Relief and fear tangled in Evelyn's throat as tears rolled down her cheeks. Hours passed before Daniel arrived. He stood at the door, immaculate in a tailored suit, scrolling his phone. The faint trace of Maya's perfume lingered on his shirt. Evelyn's voice quivered. "You came." He looked up, irritated. "You shouldn't have called me. I was in the middle of something important." "Important?" Her voice cracked. "I almost died, Daniel. Our babies." He cut her off, his tone cold as ice. "You think I asked you to get pregnant?" The silence that followed was heavier than the heart monitor's steady rhythm. Evelyn turned her face away, unable to look at him. The man who once promised her forever now couldn't even offer compassion. When he finally left, the nurse found her staring blankly at the sonogram photo on her bedside table, her trembling hand resting protectively over her belly. The only warmth left in her world came from the lives still beating inside her. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, the same venue where Evelyn and Daniel once celebrated their wedding anniversary. Tonight, Daniel called it a business gala, inviting the city's elite, reporters and investors. Evelyn hesitated to attend, her body still weak, but her heart clung to one fragile hope, that maybe he would see her, truly see her again. She arrived in a flowing ivory gown that draped elegantly over her growing belly. Makeup concealed her pallor, and diamonds sparkled faintly at her ears. As she entered, heads turned, whispers trailed behind her, the wife who refused to disappear. Then she froze. At the center of the room, Daniel stood on one knee before Maya, holding out a familiar velvet box. The ring inside caught the light, a flawless diamond Evelyn herself had designed years ago for their anniversary. A stunned hush swept through the hall, followed by a storm of camera flashes. Maya's crimson lips curved into a victorious smile as she extended her hand. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. He didn't look at her. "I'm choosing happiness," he said coldly. "Something you could never give me." The words hit harder than a slap. The room tilted, the air vanished. A searing pain tore through her body as warm blood flooded down her legs, staining her gown. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. Evelyn's knees buckled and she fell, clutching her belly. As the marble floor turned crimson beneath her, Daniel's ring gleamed under the spotlight, a symbol of betrayal glittering above his wife's broken body. Screams pierced the music as glasses shattered and guests stumbled back. The glittering ballroom that once sparkled with elegance now echoed with chaos. Evelyn lay sprawled on the marble floor, her ivory gown drenched in crimson, the color spreading fast beneath her trembling hands. Maya's shriek sliced through the air. "Daniel, she's bleeding." She stumbled back, clutching her diamond-studded hand as if the scene might stain her too. Daniel froze. His face turned pale, not from love or fear, but from the sea of eyes now turned toward him, investors, reporters, and cameras flashing relentlessly. He took one step back, his voice breaking. "Oh my God! Someone call an ambulance!" A waiter shouted, rushing forward. Others followed, their heels clicking against the slick, blood-smeared floor. Evelyn struggled to breathe, her vision swimming. "Daniel!" she gasped weakly, searching for his face. "You said you loved me once." He swallowed, glancing nervously at the crowd. "Just stay quiet, Evelyn," he hissed, trying to save face as phones recorded every second. Her eyelids fluttered, the noise fading into a blur of sirens and gasps. Paramedics burst in moments later, lifting her limp body onto a stretcher. Cameras followed them through the hall, capturing every detail. Her pale hand, her swollen belly, the ring glinting on Maya's finger. By morning, the headlines flooded every screen. CEO proposes to mistress. Pregnant wife collapses in front of guests. The world watched in horror, but for Evelyn, the world had already gone dark. In his glass-walled Manhattan penthouse, Alexander Pierce sat frozen before the glowing television screen. The breaking news replayed again and again, the blurred image of his daughter Evelyn, lying on a ballroom floor drenched in blood, cameras flashing around her like vultures. The headline blazed across every network. CEO proposes to mistress. Pregnant wife with triplets collapses. His jaw clenched. The whiskey glass shattered in his hand. Within minutes, his private jet was fueled and ready. An hour later, Alexander stormed through the hospital doors, flanked by his security team. Doctors, nurses, and guards stepped aside instinctively. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in business, merciless when wronged. When he entered the dim hospital room, the sight broke him. Evelyn lay pale and motionless, tubes running into her arms, her once bright eyes heavy with pain. "Daddy!" Her voice was weak, trembling. "I didn't want you to see me like this." He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "You shouldn't have had to, sweetheart. You married for love. And he gave you hell." The door creaked open. Daniel entered, still in his tuxedo, arrogance masking his unease. "Mr. Pierce." Alexander rose to his full height, eyes cold as steel. "You'll never see my daughter again. And if my grandsons live, they'll never bear your name." He turned to his head lawyer. "Strip him of every Pierce asset, every contract, every share." Maya tried to speak, but Alexander's gaze silenced her instantly. "Enjoy your proposal, Mississippi. My lawyers will enjoy tearing it apart." The hospital corridor buzzed with urgency as alarms blared and doctors rushed Evelyn toward the operating room. Her blood pressure plummeted, her pulse flickered, internal hemorrhage. Nurses shouted orders, the gurney's wheels squealing against the sterile floor. Outside the glass doors, Alexander Pierce stood frozen, his composure shattered. The man who once commanded empires now watched his daughter's life slip beyond his control. For the first time in decades, he bowed his head. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Please, please don't take her from me." Minutes turned into hours. The sound of machines inside the OR echoed faintly, monitors beeping, then a sharp flatline. Inside, Evelyn fought against the darkness consuming her. "Please. Let them live," she prayed silently, her hand instinctively resting over her swollen belly. Her breathing stilled. The monitor screamed a single, unbroken tone. 10 eternal seconds passed before. Beep, beep, beep. Her heart fought back. Outside, a nurse rushed to Alexander. "She's still fighting," she whispered, and tears filled his eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel stood outside the hospital, surrounded by flashing cameras. His voice was bitter, desperate. "It's not my fault. She was always dramatic, overreacting as usual." When those words reached Alexander, rage burned through his grief. He didn't speak, but his silence was the kind that destroys men. Hours later, the doors opened. The surgeon stepped out, exhausted, his eyes wet. "She's alive," he said softly. "And so are her 3 sons." Soft morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, painting golden lines across the white sheets. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open to the rhythmic beeping beside her. Steady, strong, alive. For a moment she lay still, unsure if she was dreaming. Then a quiet voice broke the silence. "They're strong," Alexander said, his tone gentler than she'd ever heard it. He sat beside her, his silver hair tousled, exhaustion etched into his face. In his large hand, he held 3 tiny hospital bracelets, each with a different name. Just like their mother. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she reached for them, her heart swelling at the thought of her sons, her miracles. The nightmare was over. Her babies were safe. Outside those hospital walls, the world was less kind to Daniel Hart. News networks exploded with scandal, headlines devouring his reputation. Hart Enterprises shares plummeted overnight. Investors fled. And Maya, the woman he destroyed his marriage for, vanished, taking what little money he had left. Alexander wasted no time. His lawyers secured Evelyn's full custody, full protection, and complete independence. No more shadows of Daniel's control. When Daniel appeared at the hospital doors, security intercepted him. "Evelyn, please," he begged. "I made a mistake." Evelyn turned her head, her gaze steady. "No, Daniel," she whispered, holding her newborns close. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." And she chose to walk away. Forever. Months later, the city glimmered beneath the twilight sky, its lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass balcony of Alexander Pierce's penthouse. The wind was cool, carrying with it the faint hum of life below. Evelyn stood there, wrapped in a soft robe, gazing out at the skyline that once symbolized everything she lost. Now it stood for everything she had rebuilt. Inside, 3 tiny cribs sat side by side, their occupants sleeping peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm. For the first time in years, Evelyn's heart felt weightless. No fear, no pain, just quiet strength. In the months since her recovery, she had poured her pain into purpose, launching the Heart Foundation for Mothers, a charity dedicated to supporting women abandoned in their most vulnerable moments. Her story became a beacon of hope, proof that broken hearts could still build empires. During a televised interview, a reporter asked softly, "Do you forgive your husband for what he did?" Evelyn smiled, serene and confident. "Forgiveness isn't for him," she replied. "It's for me, and for the sons I'll raise to never treat a woman the way their father did." Across the city, Daniel, now bankrupt and living in obscurity, watched the same broadcast in silence. His reflection in the dark TV screen looked hollow, a ghost of the man he once was. Back at the penthouse, Alexander rested a proud hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You didn't just survive, my darling," he said. "You conquered." The skyline shimmered, hope reborn.